everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am thrilled to be able to be your moderator for tonight's conversation. We are honored tonight to have Judge Deborah Ann Begay, Justice of the Peace of Maricopa County, Arizona, joining us for this discussion. Tonight's discussion is held in celebration of Pride Month, and we're so grateful to have this opportunity to hear from a remarkable Native leader whose work and also lived experience has brings such a deep meaning to this moment. My name is Lexi Locklear. I have she, her, hers pronouns. I'm Lumbee and I am from Raleigh, North Carolina. Before I properly introduce our guest, I would just like to take a minute to share a little bit of background about Advance and what it is we do here. Advanced Native Political Leadership, or just Advance for short, is the first and only national Native-led organization that's fully dedicated to building political power in Native communities. At Advance, we take a big picture holistic approach to building Native power by creating an ecosystem that supports leadership development, civic engagement, data and research, and national coordination. At the heart of our work is a simple but powerful belief: when Native people have access to national networks, innovative organizing tools, strong voter engagement strategies, and real pathways to leadership, our communities become stronger and healthier. Native political participation has been deeply impacted by centuries of legal, structural, and ongoing barriers. That's especially true for Native women. As a result, Native people are still drastically underrepresented in government at every level. A cornerstone of this effort to increase representation in Native leadership is the Native Leadership Institute here at Advance. It is our Flagstaff training program designed by and for Indigenous peoples. NLI offers a culturally grounded, cohort-based experience for Native leaders who are ready to step into elected office. Over the course of an intensive multi-day training, participants gain the practical skills and tools needed to run successful campaigns, all while being rooted in shared Indigenous cultural values. At Advance, we are committed to creating opportunities for leadership development, community connection, and visibility for Native leaders. We're working to build power through leadership representation so Native voices are heard at every level of decision making. Now to introduce our guest. Deborah Ann Begay is a citizen of the Navajo Nation, a proud Navy veteran, and a trailblazing leader dedicated to restorative justice, education, and advocacy for the Native American and LGBTQ plus communities. She's a graduate of Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, specializing in federal Indian law. She made history being the first elected Native American to serve in the Maricopa Justice Courts. Judge Begay, firstly, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm excited to have this conversation and learn a bit more about your journey. I had the joy of meeting you at a convening earlier last year, so I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more. Before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you? Where do you come from?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here tonight. This is a joy for me. Nakai Diné, the Eshnetli, Kiani, Bashashini, Ditslani, Dashashe, Todashini, Dashnale, Deborah Ann Begay, Yeshni. My name is Deborah Ann Begay. I introduced myself by telling you my clans. I'm a citizen of Navajo Nation, and our culture is that we tell you who our ancestors are before we tell you who we are, because it's more important to know where I came from and who I came from than necessarily knowing me first. So I'm introducing myself that way, and I'm honored to do so. I came from Lupton, Arizona as my birthplace, a single child of a single mother. And she gave me birth when she was 17, so she struggled to have me. And I'm honored that she kept me through life. I have a long time of education, and that led me to here. I'm a single mother myself of three amazing children. I have the oldest son who's 14, a daughter who's 12, and a baby son who's 8.
Thank you so much for sharing. To start off our discussion, for those who may not be familiar with your role or what a Justice of the Peace is, can you explain a little bit of what you do? What kind of impact does this role have on the community, especially in places like Maricopa County with significant Native populations?
Yeah, absolutely. The Justice of the Peace is basically I would say the cornerstone for the community, for the judges, because we interact with the public probably 80% of the time. So the public will come in for traffic tickets, if they get a traffic fine, DUIs, anything, civil lawsuits, anything under $10,000. So if you're suing somebody under $10,000, garnishments, we also handle orders of protection and evictions. And so we handle basically everything that might happen to a community member within a day. So we're the touchstone that the community sees on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. That's going to lay some real foundational background knowledge for us as we dive a little bit deeper into these questions. This month is Pride, and we're celebrating the spectrum of LGBTQ Two-Spirit plus identities. Can you share what it means for you to be Two-Spirit for those who may not know? Or can you share a little bit more about the significance of this specific identity within your Native community?
Yeah, in the Indigenous communities, the Two-Spirit is a more like a identified as a medicine person. It and the hierarchy or whatever, it's above the community members, and it's sort of a sacred position that usually the community chooses you. You don't denote yourself as, I'm the medicine man or the peacemaker, but the Two-Spirit is also sometimes identified by the community members. And so that basically means that you embody the male and female spirit. So they would be looked upon in the communities like a medicine person, because people would go to them because they understood both sides, and they had within the community the idea of what we would call restorative justice. So they would try to bring everybody back as a circle, back to the circle of the community. And why it's significant to me, I feel like it's been the way that I've always been, and it matches with my philosophy, my legal philosophy, my ideology of how I conduct myself in just the material world. It aligns with me spiritually, how I raise my children and how I conduct myself. And so it's been a very transformative time for me to have that reflected in the court system, because as far as I know, I'm the only Two-Spirit judge also within the Maricopa Justice Court system.
It's powerful to know the history around like Two-Spirit being restorative justice, and then having that position as a justice of the peace to be able to execute that in Arizona is amazing. You've described your journey before to the bench as a spiritual calling. Can you elaborate on what you mean by this? What helped shape your decision to become a judge?
Well, since I was a child, I've always wanted to be a part of the community, be a part of making sure everybody got along, or making sure that everybody was included. So that was kind of my personality as a child. I love to have a good time and make sure that the whole team was included. And I also played sports most of my childhood. So in sports, it's sort of like the team mentality, make sure everybody gets a chance to bat, make sure everybody has a opportunity to play on the field. And so that's where I came from as a child. And then when I went to undergraduate, I noticed the disparity of natives in all walks of life. I was lucky enough to go to a top 10 school in the Bay Area, Berkeley. When I graduated, I was picked up by software firms. At the time, it was the dot-com boom. So it didn't really even matter what my degree was. I could have got a degree in basket weaving. The top, software firms wanted to have graduates from Berkeley and Stanford. So I got a job. They taught me on the job. I learned a lot, but I also saw that there were very, very, very few Native Americans within that industry. And so that made me curious about where they were most represented, what field they were most represented in. And I had always had my mind on law, that I wanted to do law, just because of the injustice that my own tribe faced, as well as other tribes. So I thought that would be the way to give back. And so once I worked in the software field a little over 10 years, I decided to quit and then enroll in law school and pursue that as far as what I was going to be able to give back to my community and my family. And that's how it all started for me, as a way to be of service to the community that, you know, I feel like I can't say that I'm not Native because I look Native, you know, I act Native. So everybody knows I'm Native before I say I'm Native. So I wanted to have just a full round um, life that was clear that I had a purpose and that's I was living my purpose. You know, I had made that choice.
It's very powerful. Thank you. Um, you spoke earlier about your children. I'm interested to know about if they have been a driving force for you deciding to like run for office and be in this position. Can you talk about what it means to lead with their future in mind and how your role as a mother shapes the way you advocate for future generations, especially as a Two-Spirit Native leader?
Yes, absolutely. You know, the truth is I ran on the sort of hallmark of my of being a mother. You know, motherhood was the reason why I wanted to serve in the community. I've never really been too outspoken, but running for office for the first time in 2020 during COVID, it was my kids actually who won the election for me because nobody wanted to answer their door. I had a 2-year-old son in the stroller. So I would, you know, we'd roll him up to the door, knock on the door, and you know, they'd peek out and see this cute little, you know, toddler and be like, hello, you know, and open the door. And so he had a lot of doors opened on his behalf. And then my daughter and I would talk. So it was the campaign. It was my first time running. I really didn't know that much. I did have a campaign manager, but she was busy doing other things, you know, behind the scenes managing the campaign. So it was me and my 3 kids that went to doors and knocked and talked to people. And that's really what won my campaign. And when I saw that, you know, how interactive my kids could be in the campaign trail and how much they were a part of it and how much my job was so I could sustain them as a mother, you know, so I could continue our livelihood in a good way, then I realized how perfect the job was for me because I was, as a judge, justice of the peace, I affect other families in such a real way on an everyday basis. And so it just made a lot of sense for my kids to be involved and they, you know, they push me all the time. I see them and their futures and you know the sort of debacle we've made of our communities in this country. It's really incumbent on us as parents to make different changes for our kids because we're losing a lot of them. And so I really have that in mind with my children. It's hard, you know, it's hard to go against the gaming, it's hard to go against, you know, the gangs, all that stuff going on. So I really have to be mindful of how I raise them as a parent and as a two-spirit. Um, you know, at the forefront of parenting, it is our spirituality. Like for instance, my kids, you know, they know that I'm two-spirit. So a lot of times when something happens that seems difficult, they'll say, "Well, we know you can do it because you're two-spirit." It's almost like they think I'm unlimited, you know. So I like that idea that they have because spiritually, you know, we are unlimited and we just need to access that other source on the other side. And so, you know, my kids remind me that I'm always being watched, you know, I'm always making an impact, even with them, you know, which is really important. So they're really the driving force with me as far as the two-spirit. And um, you know, I'm not ashamed of being two-spirit at all, but I am a little bit shy. So when my kids are at school and we're going to a new school year, they always kind of out me because I'll go to a parent meeting or something and they'll say, Daddy, Daddy, you know, and all the other mothers will look around and look for the, you know, the male dad, and it ends up being me. So that automatically starts a conversation that I sort of have to step into and educate. So my kids are continually reminding me that as a two-spirit, I'm here to educate others, you know, because otherwise there's a lot of, you know, homophobia, you know, transphobia, things going around unless people know the story and unless people can see a live example of it. So it's been really, really helpful to have my kids around me all the time.
I love that you started them in civic engagement so young.
Mhm.
That's an awesome story. Um, Bias in the you've touched on this a little bit, but bias in the justice system is a longstanding issue, especially for people of color and LGBTQ folks. What are some ways you work to make your courtroom a space of equity, inclusion, and safety?
Well, one of the ways that I did it, you know, maybe the easiest way that I did it initially was just to show up, you know, just to be in the courtroom, just to be available, because as soon as um, litigants or the defendants would walk into my court and see that I'm a, person of color, that I'm female, I'm relatively small, they relaxed. They just kind of like let their breath out to know that it wasn't going to be a confrontive thing. It wasn't going to be a demeaning interaction. So that's I made a lot of friends that way of just kind of being very low key, sort of talkative, compassionate, of course, that makes a big difference when you're talking to a judge. That if a lot of times just being able to talk to a judge and knowing that the judge hears you. And I know that the majority of our experience who've been in court have never had that experience. I myself have been to court and I haven't had that experience where the judge, I felt the judge heard me. So I felt like the judge already made their decision before I even got to what I was saying, and that was it. And so, for me, being a representative of the, minority and the Native community, I do have a lot of Native defendants that came into my court, and a lot of Navajos, in fact, Sosi, Yazi, so it's kind of like an icebreaker, or just let them know, hey, we're on the same field. As I would always say, yate, and then that would kind of bring a smile to their face, that I'm not pretending I'm better than them or anything's different. It's like, hey, we're the same, we have maybe the same clans. I don't know, so I'm always careful about bringing that respect and being respectful to whoever comes in my court, especially if they're a person of color. I always try to say or act in a way that is very equalizing, that there's no hierarchy of power. And so I know that's not the experience in most courts. And so I made the goal to make that the experience in my court.
Court itself can be so intimidating to just go in and sit. Like I was a court watcher for some time in college, and it was just so intimidating to just go and sit. And
Mm.
so I know that just leveling that playing field is probably so helpful for a lot of people. Um, you've spoken before on how a highlight of your career is the ability to preside over marriages in your county, especially same-sex marriages. What does it mean to you to be able to affirm love and marriage equality so publicly and professionally?
Well, that was actually the best part of my job. I really, for one, I would say a hobby of mine is writing. I love to write. And so I'm very curious by nature. So I love meeting people, and the marriage ceremony was like a perfect environment for me to ask questions. How'd you meet? Who said what first? Who's the more romantic one? Getting to ask questions, and then just sort of like peeking into their private lives, their personal lives, and they're open and they're answering me, and then just seeing the joy of um, watching love bloom and the commitment, and just knowing that, no matter what's going on, like for COVID or different things, that these two um, human beings are making the choice to make a commitment to each other. And as far as like same sex couples go, it was even more so because, I would always tell them, hey, I'm Two-Spirit. I would let them know what that meant if they didn't know what it meant. I'm here. I congratulate you. It's going to be a little bit difficult, more difficult than straight, couples. I'm proud of you. I admire, the decision you're making, and just sort of that connection that is hard to make. I think I made a lot of connections and a lot of friends that way, and it was really, it gave me a lot of joy to see that um, sometimes love can seem really simple or it can seem really complicated, but when you have it like that right in front of your face, and it's like the real interaction with a couple getting married, it is, I don't know, it's a kind of a surreal experience because you feel like you're part of their private life, and yet you're just like, doing the ceremony, you're performing a like professional function, but yet you're kind of included in their private lives. And that's even more so when I would get invited to their personal homes to do the ceremony, so that really was the best part of my job.
As someone who's planning a wedding currently, the finding someone to preside over a marriage is a very like hard task that I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. So I know that you probably make people so comfortable and the ability for them to invite you in, that just seems like such a joyful time. I'm glad that you get to experience that in your position. Moving on a little bit. So this year's Pride Month feels more important and necessary than ever, especially in our current climate. What do you wish people understood about the intersection of being Native, Two-Spirit, and a public servant?
I think I want people to understand that, it took years for us to get where we're at. It took a lot of hard work. It's not a, luck of the draw by any means. It's a lot of answered prayers. It's a lot of ceremonies that went into being who we are and where we are, and that it comes as a fruition of like I would say an answered prayer, because Native people are needed more now than I think before, because there's a deeper understanding than say what happens in the non-Native world, because we don't really care too much about material things as much as making sure that our family's fed, making sure that our grandparents have a place to live, and that our elders are taken care of, and our land is returned, and things of that nature. So I think it's really important that there's underlying beliefs that we have that go really deep. And I think that if others would take the time maybe to listen to a Native person, hear their story, where they come from, their struggles, I think would make a really big difference, because I know there's a lot of unfortunately, there's still a lot of fetish with Native Americans, with their culture, and the way that we live. There's also a lot of misinformation out there. Like, for example, I have a good friend of mine who lives in another precinct, and she's a Native business owner, and she got evicted, and she had a really hard time, trying to get everything. But I thought she had a reason to have a trial, but the judge didn't let her, have a trial. He went ahead and evicted her, and then she said, "Well, I'm not going to be able to afford this," because it was like $7,000, and he said, "Go ask your tribe for help." So there's this idea that, the natives have like a casino with all this money flowing over, and we can just say, hey, per capita, I'm making this much money. And that's not the case. Maybe one or two tribes that might be the case, but there's over 575 tribes, in the United States. So that's not the case. And a lot of the tribes are struggling, and a lot of the tribes don't have the infrastructure to take care of their own members. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think as a two-spirit, as a single parent, as somebody working in the justice system, I mean, there's no better place to be for a Native American, in my perspective, than in the justice system, because the justice system is what did us so wrong, what put us here, and where we're at historically. So I think it's really imperative that people understand that, and just take time. Just take time when you meet somebody to ask, what's your background, what's your story, what are you doing, and just kind of let your guard down, because I see a lot of people have these characteristics or these beliefs about Native Americans that are totally bogus, that are like really, really old stereotypes.
Thank you for that. That was a great explanation. Let's see. This one kind of ties in a little bit more to the question we just asked. How can allies, both within and outside of Native communities, better support Two-Spirit and LGBTQ leaders?
Well, one, I think that you can show up for gatherings. You can, when there's fundraisers, a lot of like one community in Phoenix, they have a gala, functions like that, dinners. You can show up, you can support, you can ask, what's needed, like maybe from a volunteer basis. And you can see who they are as an organization, and then see how you can fit in, as far as not necessarily fitting into the organizational structure, but how you can fit in, like serving at a dinner, or, taking your family, Pride, taking your family to Pride. I mean, even if you're not gay or whatever, taking your family to Pride and sponsoring the small businesses that are the booths there, and the businesses that are giving out information. I mean, there's a lot of good things going on in the community that are part of the gay, the LGBTQ community that they're putting forth. For example, the Phoenix Indian Center, they do stuff all the time, and it's for everybody. It's for everybody. And so if we kind of have that mindset that, these services and these special functions are for everybody, and they're not exclusive, but they're inclusive, then I think that goes to change the way that some people think that things have to be exclusive. You have to, do such and such to get into my group. Well, for the LGBTQ, you don't even have to be LGBTQ to get in the group. You just have to want to, one, get along, and two, see how you can be of service.
I agree with that completely. Like the most used slogan says gay rights for human rights. And so like
Yep.
these these things affect all of us, regardless if
Mhm.
you identify that way or not. I agree completely. Um, those were all of the discussion questions that I have. I had a few couple, or actually two fun questions, a little bit more personal to end us off on a lighter note. What's something that always brings you joy or helps you recharge, whether it's a favorite meal, a place, or a daily ritual?
What always brings me joy, and helps me recharge is taking my dogs for a hike. I have three dogs, and I am a huge, I mean, I think I love dogs more than I love people, because they, always listen, they always, like, follow you around. So it's like you're always the center of attention when they're around. So no matter if you look good, or you look bad, just woke up, whether you smell bad or whatever, they're always around, and they just adore you. And so it's really good for my self-esteem. Um, I love that. I love taking them on a hike out in nature, because I like to just see them natural, and their free spirit of running around and playing, and just kind of like not really caring about what's going on in the outside world or whatever. I mean, I like it when they're running and they look back to see if I'm still there. Like, am I safe? Am I good? And they see me, and then they go on and play. That always kind of recharges me. And a lot of times when I'm in a stressful day of work, or something is, stressing me out, it resets me as well, because it reminds me that nothing is that important that I need to lose my peace of mind over, and nature, as nature is restorative. So being outside, breathing, and just kind of like, wow, the world is a lot bigger than, the four walls that I was just stuck in, and so that's something that has always been able to recharge me, and kind of remind me of why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
I love hiking with my dog, except he leaves me so far
Yeah.
behind. And he doesn't really like to check and make sure I'm behind him. Um, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would you say?
That's a good one. I'd probably say that, you know, now that I'm older, and I sort of see the trajectory of my past, and I look and I see, you know, vividly how everything had its place in my life, even though it seemed super confusing at the time. It seemed like I didn't know what I was doing. Everything, it was building a path, like it was a rock, and it was like, or like a boulder, and it was put down a certain way, and I didn't see it. But every boulder that was confusing or not structured the way I thought it was supposed to be was actually like a step. So once I got on that, it just kept going, and it was taking me to a place where I believe I'm at now, as far as, like, my spirituality, knowing really deeply who I am. So no matter what I do, nobody or no situation in this world can shake that. Like, I'm pretty solid, and I know that, I'm going to be okay, and my kids are going to be okay. And as far as, like, emotionally, this idea that we're all a piece of the puzzle. We're like this tapestry. And so If I get along with you, then we're just better. We're stronger, so there's no need to compete with you. There's no need to say I'm better or I'm different or whatever. It's just, we don't need to compete. We need to actually bond together and that's how we get stronger. So I know that lesson really well. And I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have gone through the struggles and played the team sports that I did when I was younger. But I would have told my younger self that, you know, the holy ones, they can see it all. They see everything, and it's okay because they got you and they know your purpose, and they're making sure that those boulders fall where they're supposed to fall. So you just continue to climb. You just continue to do what the next step is and the next right thing, and that's all you have to worry about because you'll end up where you're supposed to be. And so that's what I would tell myself. Not, it takes the pressure off of me that I just have to do the next right thing, and it gives me hope that my life is going to be meaningful.
Thank you for that. I think that's advice that all of us can keep dear to our hearts now. Those are all the questions that I had. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I really appreciated the conversation and always appreciate your company. Um,
Yeah.
For everyone joining in, thank y'all for tuning in tonight. If this conversation inspired you to learn more about how you can be the change in your community, we would love to talk to you about it. You can learn more about the NLI and our leadership training by checking out our website, advancednativepl.org, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or X for more information and events coming your way. I hope everyone has a great night and keep showing up for your community.
Yep. Thank you so much.